All right. Well, one of the things as we build our businesses, I've come to learn is that we've got all these things going on and all these systems and processes. Even if we don't have a lot of people on our team, maybe we have a virtual assistant, we're doing it all by ourselves. There's so many little things we have to organize. And that's why I'm excited to have with me here today someone who is an expert when it comes to putting people and systems together. I have with me uh, the host of the Bright Ideas e-commerce podcast, as well as the founder of Flowster, which is a cloud-based software that focuses on workflow and process management application for e-commerce sellers. Super excited to have with me here today, Trent Dyrsmid. Trent, thanks for coming on Maximizing E-commerce.
Hey, thank you very much for having me, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and get right into it. Tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you got into the whole e-commerce world.
Sure. So I've been a podcast host for a long time now, about 9 years.
And you must have been one of the originals.
Yeah, I was pretty early.
Yeah.
And so I know a lot of people, obviously, from interviewing hundreds of different entrepreneurs on my show over the years. And back in early 16, a couple of my friends that are private label sellers, they were after me to get on Amazon. Got to get on Amazon. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. Because we had a very successful digital marketing agency. Well, not too long after that, our largest client told us they weren't going to renew their contract. And I thought, this is a good time to make a shift, to get out of the service-based world, which I'd been in pretty much my entire life, into more of a productized business, which I'd always wanted to do. So I took a stab at private label, really not knowing what I was doing. And honestly, I wasn't very successful. I was selling a lot, but I wasn't making any money because I was having to spend so much on pay-per-click. And I think that was because I made bad product selections. So fast forward a couple months in the summer. So now I was really focused on interviewing Amazon sellers because that's what I want to do, right? So I'd always interview folks to learn. And I interviewed this guy by the name of Dan Metters on my show. And that was when I discovered that selling wholesale on Amazon was even a thing. And I was fascinated by what Dan was doing. And I hung up the phone and I said to my wife, we're going to do that starting right now. And within 5 months, we were doing over $100,000 a month. In our first year, we did over $1 million, I think 1.1 million. And that company this year in 2019 ranked, you can see it right there, we're number 254 on the Inc. 5000 list. So, and all largely attributed to my team. And I guess the standout details on my story was that I was able to delegate myself out of the business within 6 months of founding the company. And a lot of people scratch their head when they hear that because they think, well, how on earth did you do that? And I've since then, I've had very little of an operational role. I'm still an advisor, and my wife pretty much runs the business now with a team of employees and virtual assistants. But here's the key. When I started the company, and this is what helped us to grow so quickly in the beginning, rather than rolling up my sleeves and getting busy working in the business, because I'm not a first-time CEO, I sat down and I first of all, I understood, well, what has to happen for us to find and source products, which is obviously the most important thing to do in the beginning. And then I sat down and as I was doing the thing that I never wanted to have to do again, I was documenting the thing that I was doing. So in other words, I was creating a standard operating procedure for the thing that I knew had to be done over and over and over and over again, but I didn't want to do it. So as soon as I had the standard operating procedure for how we did research and how we extracted storefronts and how we filtered all the numbers in spreadsheets and how we found the email addresses and blah, 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 everything that is involved in sourcing products wholesale, I just went out and hired a bunch of virtual assistants and I assigned them all those workflows. And I said, you guys do all the legwork. And what that enabled me to do was to do nothing but respond to the replies in my inbox, because we would send hundreds of emails every single week. So we had to do all this product research to figure out what products we wanted to go after. And so that's a lot of data crunching. And most of it is fairly manual. There's some software tools that we use, but I didn't want to do that. I knew that the greatest value for me was having a conversation with a brand, because at my heart, I've got a background in sales. I understand how to ask questions and how to highlight problems and provide solutions and so forth and so on. And in wholesale, when you're developing supplier relationships,
Mhm.
That's the key. That's where the money is your ability to form those relationships. So because I out documented everything and I delegated everything, I could literally sit there every morning. I would come in and I'd just look at my inbox and I'd see the replies and I'd look at them and I'd make replies and I'd look at price lists and I would open accounts and all of that worked exceedingly well.
Huh. Okay. So, because I've always heard because I don't have experience in wholesale, although I'm getting very curious about it recently, because the thing I've always heard is it's hard getting the accounts, because if you don't have a storefront, they don't necessarily want to work with you. Is that what you found?
Well, that's part of it. I think now we're at a point in the cycle where there are so many Amazon sellers that and brand. See, in the early days, brand, like, and I say early days, let's go back 5, 6, 7 years.
Okay.
Brands had no understanding of what the Amazon channel could do to their business.
Right.
So for years, these brands are out there and they're selling through brick and mortar retail. They've got this thing called minimum advertised price, and all their brick and mortar partners would adhere to minimum, I call it MAP, minimum advertised price, and they didn't have any problems. So then, 6, 7 years ago, the very, very early Amazon sellers are saying, hey, I want to open an account and sell your stuff on Amazon. They're like, yeah, sure, no problem. We don't care. Knock yourself out. So they said yes to everybody. Well, how did Jeff Bezos and his team design Amazon? One product listing, multiple sellers. So they all had to share the buy box. So what does that do? The sellers start racing each other to the bottom using repricers. They're all violating MAP, and now the margin is disappearing. So now the brands have these huge problems because they've got 20, 30, 40 sellers. They don't even know who they all are. They don't know where they're getting the product. But Walmart or Target is a huge customer of theirs, and Walmart or Target or whatever retail chain you'd like is saying, hey, look, the product's at $19.99. That's MAP, and it's on Amazon for $18. We're not happy. You need to fix that. And so brands then realized, oh man, the reason we have this problem is because we let everyone and their dog start selling our stuff on Amazon. So now we don't want any more Amazon sellers. So the key to our success has been to say to them, look, do you know who all these sellers are? No. Do you know how to identify who these sellers are? No. Do you know how to remove the sellers that you don't want so you can get MAP under control? And they're like, no. And we're like, well, we know how to do all of that. And that was the basis on which they would approve us to become one of their sellers.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're looking at it from providing value to them, basically.
Totally. We're basically like an Amazon marketing agency, but so where our job is to do two things: help them to remove unauthorized sellers, maintain MAP, and grow market share. But rather than send them an invoice for, hey, we worked 27 hours or 44 hours on your account this month, because I hate that model, we make our money simply by selling their products. So that we buy the stuff wholesale from them, we ship it into Amazon, and we sell it. Because that way our income and our profit is not tied to the amount of hours that we work every month. Because if we do a really good job of cleaning everything up, after that, there's not much work to do. It becomes this beautiful gravy train of cash. Because if there's only 2 sellers, me and another guy, or just us, there is no race to the bottom. There is no MAP violations. All the listings are already optimized now. Now we've got campaigns running. We don't really have to do anything, but our income didn't go down. Because if we were on the hourly billing model, well, now there's no more hours to bill because we're not doing any work. But we're still selling 3,000 units a month or 4,000 units a month. So I'm still making $100,000 a year from having this account, even though I barely have to do anything.
Okay. Gotcha. So you're doing some work to help them clean up on the front end. And then you're just kind of, now that you've shown your value, you're just buying and cycling it through. Now, out of curiosity, how does, this could be a very basic question, but how do they kick sellers off their listing?
That falls under the trade secrets category. There are companies that will help you with this, and that's all I'm going to say.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. No, I understand. Before we hit record, you said you were an open book, except, if something came up. I totally respect that. So, all right. So let's jump into transitioning now from, you've built this basically wholesale empire. And what's interesting is so many people I hear are usually go the other way around, like they were in wholesale and then they want to jump into private label, but you went the other way around, which sounds very intensive. and you touched on, you were documenting the processes, so that's how
Mhm.
you're able to do this, is through the processes. So
Mhm.
how do you organize a team with systems and processes to be able to do all that? Because it sounds like a lot of manual work. Like, you made it sound easy, but as I start digesting it, it sounds like there actually is a ton of work there.
Well, there could be.
Could be.
So, for example, a couple of years ago, you mentioned I'm the founder of this software company called Flowster. Well, a couple of years ago,
Mhm.
that company didn't exist. And so I'm up on stage at this conference. The room is full of 500 different Amazon sellers at various stages. Some of them just starting off, some of them at 20 grand a month, some of them at 50 grand a month, kind of all over the map. And I'm getting up there, and I've achieved a greater result, I would assume, than the vast majority of people in the audience, which is why I was on stage and they were in the audience.
Mhm.
And so I said, "Hey, everybody, I'm going to explain to you how I did what I did, but I don't have anything for sale. So you need to take really good notes or listen carefully, because I'm going to fire hose you with details over the next hour." And so I did that. And much to my surprise, at the end, when people come up to the microphones that are in the aisles,
Uh-huh.
they all ask the same question. They said, "Hey, I get it. I understand that I need standard operating procedures. You said it took you a year to build them all. I don't want to do that. Could I just buy a copy of yours?" And that was a big light bulb moment. I was like, because there's a lot of people that sell training courses. I don't sell any training courses.
Okay.
And I thought, well, yeah, I guess we could try that and see how well it sells. Long story short, we sold $1 million worth in the first year, and we've sold millions of dollars worth of pre-made SOPs. Basically, I just make copies of mine,
Uh-huh.
to Amazon sellers. So to answer your question, is it a lot of work? Well, if you can't go buy pre-made SOPs, yeah, making them is a lot of work, because they're highly detailed documents,
Sure.
and we sell a package of them. It's called Webs. It's $2,500, and I think there's like 70 or 80 SOPs. Well, every single one of those SOPs took anywhere from an hour to 8 hours to build, times 70 or 80
Okay.
is a lot of hours. And then
Yeah.
we're always updating ours and keeping them, make changes as the software companies that we use make little changes to the interface. There's a level of upkeep required. So yeah, it could be a great deal of work to build SOPs. Now, setting that aside, once you have SOPs, and you don't need to build them all at once. I mean,
True.
for me, I started with, well, I need to source products, so I'm going to build SOPs around product sourcing. When I get to purchasing products, I'll build SOPs around purchasing products. And when it comes to I'm receiving shipments, I'll start building SOPs around reconciling my shipments and creating inbound shipments for Amazon. It was very linear for us.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have those SOPs, you're in this new wonderful place where now you've got the first D of the 2D equation. You've got documentation done. Now you just need to
Mm-hmm.
delegate. And delegating, when you have great SOPs, is actually really, really easy. I know I've heard that people have struggled to hire VAs. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to find virtual assistants that have experience already, or maybe because they don't have great systems, the information, the instructions conveyed to the VA aren't necessarily as detailed or as tight as you would want them to be. So they're having limited success with their VAs because maybe the VAs aren't doing it right, or they're not getting it done on time, or what have you. We don't have that problem, because of the fact that our documentation is so tight, and it runs in a software application where I can literally say, okay, Kevin, here's a workflow. It's been assigned to you and it's due on Thursday at 3. And you're going to get an email telling you that. And if you go into our Flowster software and you look on your to-do calendar, it's going to show you that, this thing's due at 3 o'clock on Thursday. And now all you have to do, you don't need to watch any training video. If you're a brand new VA or a brand new employee with us, you don't need to go through orientation. You don't need to watch a training video. I don't have to personally invest any of my time holding your hand. I just assign you the SOP. You log into the software and you start on the first step, and it says do this, and there's detailed instructions on how to do this, and you're like, okay, I've done this, and you put a little tick in the tick box, and then step 2 says do this, and you follow the instructions, and they're highly detailed, lots of screenshots and big red arrows or whatever we need to use to convey how to do the thing. And then you put a tick box in that, and you just tick. It's like, I like to use the bake a cake recipe. if I gave you a recipe book and on page 63 was how to bake a chocolate cake, you and I, we wouldn't have a conversation in advance on how to bake the chocolate cake. I'd just hand you page 63. You'd follow directions and more or less you'd bake the cake, and it'd probably turn
Right.
out pretty good.
Yeah, that makes sense, because it really is a lot like baking a cake, having a process. Because far too often we get stuck in like kind of just describing
Oh
to
yeah.
VAs or whatever what we want, but most of the time we're stuck in our own heads of the knowledge we already have, and so if we give it to someone else, they may not have the same knowledge, and so the context is missing. So yeah, it is. The more you can think of it like baking a cake, or like even a pilot. Like a pilot is done thousands of hours to get up in the air. I pretty much every time I go up in the air, I want to make sure that he's or she is looking at that checklist to make sure, oh yeah, landing gear's down, or whatever the case is.
Correct. Even the most senior pilots, they still have a pre-approach checklist. They still have a pre-takeoff check. I'm a pilot, so I understand how this stuff works. So
Oh, nice.
no matter how long you've been flying, you use checklists.
Mm-hmm.
They're absolutely critical to your continued living and breathing.
Gotcha. So let's just walk through what is in a good. Now, I know you talked about it for your own, but like if let's just say somebody like was going to write their own checklist.
Yeah.
What would be how would you describe them for like to make their own recipe, so to speak, to make sure that the person truly understands it? Like what would be a good SOP? Like if you were to describe it to someone who had no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah. So here's how I built all of mine. I have a 27-inch monitor, so it's big enough that I can have two web browsers side by side. Okay. So in one web browser, I'm doing the thing, whatever it is. And in the other web browser, I'm documenting the thing that I'm doing. So as I take each step, I'm taking a screenshot, big red arrows, I'm writing out instructions, I'm putting a tick box. The goal here, I like to call it the mom test, because none of our moms are particularly technical, right? So if when I'm done doing the thing and documenting the thing, if I could hand that checklist, that recipe to bake our chocolate cake, to stick with our metaphor,
sure,
and without speaking to my mom, if she could bake the chocolate cake and have it turn out at least reasonably well, maybe there's like one or two questions, maybe. But ideally, mom doesn't have to ask me anything. Then you have a great SOP. So putting that and setting the metaphors aside, when we hire VAs, for example, we don't interview them like people interview, like, tell me about your work experience and what do you like to do, and tell me about such a time when you did this, and tell me about a time when we don't do any of that stuff. We use that for employees, but there's different reasons, because we're looking for cultural fit.
Right.
But with virtual assistants, we're simply looking for task competency. So we'll put up a posting, and we will literally hire 5 virtual assistants, and we'll pay them all $10 or whatever the appropriate amount of money is to do the thing. And we'll create a user for them in our software, and we'll assign them the workflow. And whatever one or two of those 5 people who do it the fastest with the least questions and the least mistakes, they get the job. And then there's no training, because they just proved in the interview that they're competent. And that works really well if your documentation is detailed enough. Now, if you find that all 5 of those VAs are asking you questions, well, what about this and what about that? And there's ambiguity here and there's ambiguity there, then your documentation sucks and you need to improve it.
Right. But that makes sense, because if you're getting the same question from all 5 or
Correct.
4 or whatever the case is, okay, there's probably something that needs to be added on to the mom test so that mom can bake the chocolate cake the way the cake's supposed to and doesn't come out, all doughy or whatever the case is.
Correct. And that's where the struggle is for the SOP creators, the boss, the person who's going to be doing the delegating. Because, for me to fire up Loom or some screen sharing software and spend 3 minutes walking through a thing and talking them through it and then giving that to my VA, that's pretty effortless for me. But it's really not an effective way to create a collection of standard operating procedures. Checklists are much, much better than, because in an 8-minute video, there's all sorts of ways that people can skip steps and forget stuff. And then when things change, then you got to reshoot the video, and it's a nightmare. So the reason that people don't have highly detailed SOPs is because it's so much work to create the damn things. Like it takes something that takes me, say, 15 minutes to do It might take me 4 hours to make the SOP for that, because I've got to remember every single time I do something, I have to make sure that that's in my SOP. And people, they don't want to do it. They don't want to test. They don't want to, they'll just like, oh, I'll just spend the 15 minutes doing it and I'll delegate it later. So they're forever stuck in the prison of doing the thing, because they never took the 4 hours to document the thing, so that they never had to do the thing ever again. I, not being a first-time CEO and having been through this before, I'm fully familiar with the payoff of putting the 4 hours in, so that I never have to do the 15 minutes ever again. So I was, not only was I willing, I was enthusiastic to put the time and effort into creating the documentation.
Well, that makes sense. Okay, I understand what you're saying. So basically, you have to think of it as, okay, because too many people get stuck in the, oh, if it's going to take me 4 hours to do it, it would only take me 20 minutes to do it on my own. So if I'm documenting it, it's just taking up all this time. But if you can hand it off to someone else and you think of it as 15 minutes, and if that's being done weekly over the course of a year, I can't do the math, but that's way more than the 4 hours that you put into it.
Yeah, you save a lot of time. And here's another little secret too. Because my business grew so quickly, of course, I was eventually, well, not eventually, fairly quickly, I started to hire US employees. And then I put the burden on the US employees to create the SOPs as well. So within 6 months, I had delegated myself completely out of the business. I wasn't even creating SOPs anymore. The SOPs that have been created for that business from 6 months on, I've barely had a hand in creating any of them, but I still own the company and I still get the profits.
Nice. Well, let's talk a little bit about the U.S. employees that are creating them. So, I can just, from the conversations we've had, I can tell you're a very good process-minded person. And just because someone's in the U.S. doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have the same level of detail and process mind. So what are some mistakes that were happening frequently with your employees who are doing it that, over time, maybe they got better, or you coached them a certain way to get better at writing the SOPs?
The biggest mistake, so in our software, we have the SOP template is sort of divided into two columns. On the left is the steps, the what you need to do. On the right is the detail of how you need to do each one of those steps. When you click on the left, over on the right, there's all these instructions. So if it was like, let's just use an example. If it was set up a WordPress site, well, a bad SOP is going to say set up a WordPress site, and on the right hand side it would say go to WordPress and install it. Well, that's not very helpful, because what if you don't know how to install it?
Got it.
So making sure you have enough detail with the how, making sure the how is detailed enough so that there's no question on the what. That's number one. Then the other mistake is, so like I'm looking at an SOP on my screen right now called Amazon Product Research Tool. And it's for how to use this Helium 10 to use their black box tool. And there are 19 steps on the left. And each one of those steps has a how, so set of instructions. Another mistake to make, instead of making 19 steps, I could have one step, but that one step was really, really long. Well, the longer, so the how has so I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling and I'm scrolling. The more, and so there's very few tick boxes and there's a lot of information. That's bad, because with one step, as my employee or subordinate is scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, they could miss something. There's room for error. So instead, we have 19 steps and we keep each step pretty short. So do this thing, tick, then do this thing, tick, then do this thing, tick, then do this thing, tick, as opposed to do this and then 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 put a tick box in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, because basically you're trying to make it, you're not eating the whole elephant all at once.
Yes, good way of describing it.
Right. That you're
like to break our elephants up into
exactly
bite-sized chunks as we can.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
So those are the two things about creating SOPs. So your listeners might be thinking, well, okay, that's cool. I'll do that in Google Docs. Well, there's some problems around that as well, because you need, once you have, like in our case, I think we have 2 employees and 6 ish virtual assistants, I think, at this point in time in the Amazon business. So there's all these VAs who are actively running workflows, and our employees are the ones that assign them to them. If you're just sending out an email saying, hey, do this thing, and you hit send, well, there's no accountability built into that. Once I, as the delegate or have sent you an email, so now you're the delegate E, and I said, hey, Kevin, do this thing. It's due by Friday. If you don't get it done by Friday, how am I remembering? What's telling me that you didn't get it done? Nothing.
So unless you like write it on a legal pad or come back to it.
So now scale it up a bit. I have 4 of you. So I've got 4 Kevins, and I've given you all tasks over email, and none of you managed to get it done on time. How do I remember that? I don't. I'm going to forget. I'm human. So the software, what the software does is it tells both the delegator and the delegatee when a deadline is missed. And that's obviously pretty darn important. So as I have an ever increasing number of workflows, in other words, active checklists that are being done. So somebody's doing this and somebody's doing this and somebody's doing this. Nothing's going to fall through the cracks because the software won't let it fall through the cracks. So that's critical, as well as that you have a project management or a control mechanism in place so that all your great documentation and all the stuff that you're assigning people actually gets done on time.
Gotcha. Now, one question I do have is let's go back to the pilot example. So like, there's not like a checklist for how to fly the plane. There's a checklist for, pre-approach or, pre-takeoff or whatever the case is. So what are some tips for how to divide up someone's own workflows to make, okay, this shouldn't all be one workflow. This is probably not just like ticks within the workflow, but like multiple different workflows. Like, when do you separate it out? So it's not just sell on Amazon.
Yeah, we do that in a number of ways. So within our organization, first of all, we have folders. So we have a folder for product sourcing. We have a folder for product listing optimization. We have a folder for pay-per-click management. We have a folder for shipping. We have a folder for Amazon account health management. We have a folder for supplier relations. We have a folder for HR. So at a category level, think of them as departments in your business. Each department in our company has a folder, and within that folder are then all of the standard operating procedures that would be required to do all the things that need to be done on an ongoing basis. So to your question, so let's deal with product sourcing. And wholesale product sourcing can be broken down into a couple of basic steps. Step number 1 is generating product leads. So generating product leads is further broken down into the way we do it is we do something called super targeting. So super targeting is its own step. That's finding competitors. Okay. So that has its own SOP because it's a relatively short SOP. So then once we have this list of competitors, then we have to analyze all their products. So that's an SOP on how to analyze all of the products of a given competitor. And then, so once all those products have been analyzed in a spreadsheet, the ones that we want to go after then need to go to the next step. And the next step is making sure that all those leads are imported into our CRM. So there's another SOP for that. And then once all the leads, I skipped a step. We have to find all the contact information for the companies that own and make all those products. So there's an SOP for that. Then there's an SOP for bringing it into our CRM. And then there's an SOP for sending the emails. Then there's an SOP for following up on the email. So we kind of take the whole process and break it down into like, well, what are the segments of activity that have to happen? And that's basically how we break up the SOPs. There's no one right way to do it. There's just the way that we've chosen to do it or that anybody else chooses to do it.
Now, do you have at the end of an SOP workflow, like, okay, now you've completed this, create this SOP workflow for the next step? Because these aren't necessarily steps within an SOP you're describing. You're describing separate SOP processes, right?
Yeah, and we use a naming convention. So our SOPs, the sourcing will say step 1, blah, blah, blah. So that SOP has step 1 as the prefix for its name. And then there's another one that says step 2. And then there's another one that says step 3. So that's how people know that, okay, well, when I'm done step 1, I need to do step 2. And the other thing too is we will have one VA, all they're doing is step 1 over and over and over and over and over again. And then another VA, they might be doing the step 2 and step 3 over and over and over and over again. So we don't have one VA that goes through the whole thing. We segment it so that, because we like to treat it like a production line in a factory where one worker, because Filipinos are real, they're not like, the culture there is very different. They're not like here where people need diversity in their workforce. Based on my experience of using VAs now for almost a decade, they are quite happy to do the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Right, because it gives them comfort and they know that they're doing it right because it's on the checklist. And if things change, do you recommend putting updated X date or whatever the case is in the workflow so that way if they see it, they see, oh, it's been updated?
We put versioning in ours only because we now sell copies and we want to know, that way our customers can tell us what version they're on. And if there's a newer version, they get it for free. But for the worker, there's not really any reason to do that because the way our software works. So we use we have 2 phrases. We have an SOP template. So think of that as the master copy.
Okay.
And then we have a workflow. Well, all a workflow is a copy of the template that's been assigned to somebody with a due date.
Got it.
So let's say that there's 5 workflows, 5 employees all in the middle of doing the thing. And I, as the boss, figure out that, well, at step 3 of the master copy, I'm going to make a change because I figured out a way to do the thing better, faster, smarter, whatever. And this is actually really important. In the software, when we finish making the change to the master copy and you hit the save button, it'll say, do you want to update all the active workflows? Well, yeah, of course I do. So, and there might be an exception to that, which is why we make it optional. But so now my 5 subordinates who are doing the thing, now there's a new step 13 in their SOP, and they can't finish the SOP until they do step 13, which is the step that I added or that I changed or whatever. And that the reason that I think that that's so incredibly important is, as the CEO, I like to spend my time working on the business, which in my mind means I'm out there and I'm on podcasts and I'm interviewing people and I'm going to conferences. I'm trying to get smarter. And if you don't have so I get this, let's say I get this great idea and it's going to improve the productivity of our whatever by whatever percent. We're going to be able to make blog posts faster, better, quicker, whatever. If I don't have SOPs in place, how do I push that piece of information down throughout my organization? I got to have conference calls. I got to have training. I got to hope people change the hardest thing in the world to change, and that is the human habit. It's almost impossible to get people to change their habits. So it's very, very, very difficult. But when I have an SOP and I hit the edit button on the master template and I make with it and I integrate whatever new piece of knowledge I've acquired and I hit the save button and it says, do you want to update all the active workflows? And I say, yes. That's the end of it right there. There's no training, no orientation, no meeting in the boardroom, no nothing. Because now if you're one of my subordinates, you're going to see that this thing has changed and you're going to do the thing the new way and off we go.
Gotcha. Now, I'm sure you've created a culture around follow the SOP to a T. So that way they know, if there's a change, it's in there. Now for someone who's maybe, let's say they're like, I like that kind of idea, whether they use Flowster or something similar or Word or Google Docs or whatever the case is. How do you make sure, or what tips, I guess would be the question, to change the culture so that people are using those, since you've developed the culture pretty well where people are following your SOPs?
Yeah, it's actually, now let's put this question in context. Okay. I don't have 300 people working for me.
Sure.
So it's a relatively small crew. And I think that might have made it easier than if I had 300 people working for me, because now I've got 300 habits to change. But in our organization, it wasn't very difficult because we did it from day one. That's probably one of the reasons. But 2, if you think about it from your employee's perspective or your virtual assistant's perspective, by having great documentation, they know what to do. It makes it easy for them. It makes it easier for them to do their job because there's a set of written instructions and they get assigned these workflows and it shows up in their inbox and they just log into the software and they go, do the thing, tick, 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 tick. So it just wasn't very difficult for us now in a larger organization that maybe has got people who've been there forever and they're just doing it from memory because I've been doing it for 20 years and I know how to do it.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sure it'd be more difficult to get them to use the software, but that wasn't the experience that we had.
Gotcha. Well, and the thing of it is, when you're the business owner, sometimes you can give people the opportunity to find new opportunities if they're not on board with your new direction.
Correct. You can liberate them to find a better
Right.
career.
Right. Not that you necessarily have to do that right away, but like,
Correct.
you can work up to that if the situation warrants it. Well, what other tips do you have just in general for creating processes and, keeping your employees on track, so to speak?
Um, Without, of course, sounding biased, I'd say, use Flowster, but that's not really advice per se. Beyond what we've talked about, I mean, as the boss, you got to drink the Kool-Aid.
That's a good point. It all starts with you.
There are things that I do not delegate, but I have an SOP for all of them. I do product launches, and a product launch is a fairly involved process. I do most of the work myself. There's a lot of detail involved in a product launch. There's a lot of things I got to get done. And if I didn't have an SOP, oh my God, I would forget stuff consistently. And my product launches would not be as successful as a result of me forgetting stuff. It would be a big deal. So I absolutely drink the Kool-Aid. So I guess that's the best advice I could give you is you got to be drinking the Kool-Aid.
That I get that. You're creating the culture from the top. So just out of curiosity, when you say product launches, this is a little bit of a tangent. Is that more on the private label side or more on the wholesale side? Because I'm very wholesale ignorant.
Well, we if we're launching a new product for one of our suppliers, we have SOPs for that.
Oh, gotcha.
But what I was specifically referring to is, so because I've become known as the SOP guy for Amazon sellers, we have affiliates that basically say, hey, I want to promote your web's product to my audience. And so we call that a product launch when an affiliate comes and they, there's a webinar and then the shopping cart, and when there's this pre-launch phase, and then the shopping cart opens and the SOPs are available for a week and the shopping cart closes and the whole thing takes 2 weeks and blah, blah, blah. I'm in the middle of those literally as we speak. That's what I mean when I say a product launch. We do that on a pretty regular basis.
Gotcha. And I can see what you mean with the open and close of the cart, that you got to make sure every step is followed. Otherwise, you could get to the end and be like, oh, shoot, I forgot this part. No wonder. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, this has been I think a very helpful conversation in understanding SOPs and just processes in general and how to keep people on processes, which I think can oftentimes be a struggle for business owners, oftentimes more than we realize it's going to be. We just think everyone's going to understand what we tell them to do, and it's just all going to happen magically. So if somebody wanted to follow you or find you on the internet, where would they go to do that?
Well, I'm the only Trent Dyrsmid on planet Earth. So if you type my name into Google, you'll find me. You can come to brightideas.co if you're interested in listening to my e-commerce podcast. You can go to, if you're interested in learning more about Flowster's app, you can go to flowster.app. And I think you're going to put some links in the show notes. We've got some pre-made SOPs that people can go into our Flowster marketplace and they can download them for free, a couple of clicks, and put them in their Flowster account. And the Flowster account will be free up to 5 SOPs, I believe it is. And then, if someone wants to talk to me about a business venture or whatever, just find me on LinkedIn and send me a message.
Awesome. And I will also throw in there, I've created an SOP on Flowster,
Nice.
which people can download for free. And I'll make sure to link to that as well on how to expand into international marketplaces. And all those links I'll make sure to put, if someone's watching on YouTube, it'll be in the description down below, and it'll be in the show notes if they are, for anyone that's listening on the podcast. So either way, they'll have the ability to go to all of those SOPs that you and I both mentioned to be able to download those and test them out and give them a run and see how Trent has created his workflows.
And they should also listen to the interview where you were a guest on my show. It's episode 292. So make sure you put that in your show notes as well.
Yes. It was recently on your show as well. So that was episode 292, and I will definitely make sure to link to that. In fact, I'm going to jot that down so I do not.
You could even put that link right in your SOP.
That's true. I've been thinking. my assistant and I, for the podcast, what we're going to do is actually this, we're gonna eat the cooking here. Create an SOP for our process for adding this onto these interviews onto both YouTube and the podcast, so that way all the steps are followed. So I totally get it here, and I've signed myself up for Flowster. So I don't mean to be pitching here, but I do think it's a valuable tool.
Well, I have those SOPs. There's the thing in the marketplace called the Blogger Content Production Pack, and there's
Mm-hmm.
SOPs in there for your YouTube video production, SOPs, and then these are the ones that I use for my
Yep.
podcast, for my blog posts, for my YouTube video production, for webinars, and for email broadcasts. So if you haven't got that already, I'm happy to furnish you with a complimentary copy.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, this has been very helpful, and I think it's a good topic for people in general, just to document their processes and get it out there. And you definitely have done a good job in your company getting that all set up.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, appreciate having you on. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.